Sega.
Hang On was an early sprite scaling success story for Sega, so a sequel was released in 1987. This version includes 4 different continents to race on, tracks that go up and down, unlike the original, plus a turbo boost feature to make things even faster and more super. First, we'll look at the 1987 arcade version, which ran on similar hardware to Outrun. This I'll be emulating in MAME. Next, we'll look at the PC-DOS version, which released in 1988. I'll run this in DOSBox. After that, we'll take a look at the versions included in the Ryuga Kotoku Studio games to date, which started with Yakuza 0 in 2018, Yakuza 6 The Song of Life in 2021, Yakuza Like a Dragon in 2020, yes, the 7th game came out before the 6th one on the PC, and finishing off with Lost Judgment, which hit the PC in 2022. There are some differences between each version. The arcade version, again by Yu Suzuki and the AM2 development team, released in 1987, on the upright and ride-on mini cabinets shown below. As per the original game, you had to control your bike with realistic handlebars and throttle control. There was also, like the original Hang On, a full bike version of the game titled Limited Edition Hang On, but this didn't arrive in the arcades until 1991. Again, similar to Hang On, the upright version of the game features different road layouts to the ride-on units. Let's take a look at what's changed in the first stage of each continent. Firstly, here's the beginner course set in Africa, with just 6 stages. As you can see, the ride-on version differs wildly to the upright version in terms of road direction and turns. The second junior course is Asia, with 10 stages. Now this one appears to be identical in both the upright and ride-on versions of the game. The third senior course is set in America. This one has 14 stages. Initially it appears to be identical on both upright and ride-on versions, but towards the end of the stage they start to follow a different path. Finally, here's the expert course with 16 stages set in Europe. As per America, the stages start similarly, then evolve in different ways. The reason I'm showing both versions first is because most of the home ports use the ride-on version of the game, which is what we'll look at in more detail specifically. Before we go any further, let's look at the intro sequence. The logo swings into place and pulses before a rolling demo, which gradually goes through all the courses and stages in the game with some poor riding skills and no turbo boost usage. The high scores are then displayed for each course, before the logo flies on again. The 1991 limited edition did away with the super branding and replaced it with limited edition, as shown here, but otherwise it's pretty much identical to the ride-on version of the game. When you start the game, you first choose which of the 4 courses you'd like to attempt, then choose a choice of soundtrack, similar to the start of Outrun. Once you've picked a course and music, the race begins. Your rivals all race off much faster than you, and you spend your time trying to make it to the stage checkpoint before the timer runs out, whilst avoiding the other bikes along the way. Unlike the original game, in this one stages come in pairs, meaning the first 2 stages of Africa are in this light desert, before the scenery changes for stages 3 and 4, with some trees, background mountains, and signs for, Birdland. Stages 5 and 6 then switch to an Egyptian theme with pyramids in the background. If you make it through all the stages, you'll be rewarded with one of several end sequences. These aren't generally as amusing as Outrun, but they're nice to see. You can then enter your initials into the high score table. One thing the previous Hang On game and Outrun were famous for were the big crashes. In Super Hang On, they're not as explodey as the original game, with you either sliding off, taking a small tumble, or having a huge one. Now, enjoy a minute of this game without me talking over it. The DOS port arrived in 1988 and was converted by Quicksilver Software for Data East. Yep, this wasn't released by Sega themselves, unlike most of the other DOS games of the era. It released both on 5.25-inch and 3.5-inch floppy disk. The DOS intro sequence is a bit less exciting than the arcade, starting with a sparkly Data East logo before a nice picture of a bike, then fading into the joystick or keys selection page, and that's it, no rolling demo. When you start the game, you choose your stage, but not the music, as the DOS port has none. It runs fairly fast. Here I set up DOSBox to count down seconds as close to reality as I could. There are a few key issues with the DOS port. Firstly, the audio isn't great. Secondly, the handling can become rather heavy, meaning it feels like you're unable to avoid crashing on some corners, even if you jam on the brakes. The computer-controlled rivals only appear one at a time and bang in the middle of the road. Their hit area is a bit hit and miss, however, and you often find yourself bouncing off a rival into the scenery. On top of that, you're practically unable to overtake them unless you use the turbo boost, and occasionally they will overtake from behind, knocking you out the way. Speaking of which, there's only one crash animation here, but it always plays at the same frame rate regardless of how fast the game itself is running. Initially I thought the road scenery doesn't change in the DOS version, as the Africa stage was always yellow. But in the European stage, the sides of the road do change colour, but only after 3 stages, unlike the arcade where it changes after every pair of stages. Although I'm not sure why Europe has a desert stage. The high score table is a lot less exciting too, with only the top 3 listed for each location. It's time now for a minute of this version. At the time of making this video, Super Hang-On has appeared in a number of games by Ryu Gakutoku Studio. It's playable in Yakuza 0 from 2018, Yakuza 6 The Song of Life from 2021, Yakuza Like a Dragon from 2020, as mentioned the 7th game in the series came to the PC before the 6th one, plus it appears in the PC version of Lost Judgment, which made it to the PC in 2022 once the licensing rights were sorted out on the lead actor. Yakuza 0 is set in the 1980s, so you need to go into the smaller Sega High-Tech Land arcade in order to find Super Hang-On, but it only appears after completing a quest in the main game. This is the only Yakuza title with an amusing introduction before you play the game. Once you've been shown the controls, you can then adjust the screen size. We'll go for full screen non-stretched. This is the only version of Yakuza which doesn't have fake arcade plastic surrounding the sides of the screen when running like this. One issue with the Yakuza 0 port is that the game often loads with this soft blur filter applied. It doesn't always do this though, and sometimes appears pixel sharp. All the classic arcade games are affected with this issue in Yakuza 0. A second issue is that the picture is scaled slightly differently, with part of the top and bottom of the screen being cut off, so your bike tyre now touches the bottom of the screen. I'll go through this in more detail in the Pixel Compare screenshot sequence later on. In Yakuza 6 The Song of Life, Sega's High-Tech Land is now rebranded Club Sega. You'll find the game in the larger arcade right by the door. This is the only version of Yakuza where you can choose the difficulty level simply by choosing the cabinet you want to play. In-game, there's a small amount of background street noise still noticeable. Once again, you can set the screen aspect ratio before playing. Unlike all the other Yakuza and Judgment games though, the picture is scaled at a full 4:3 aspect ratio, with no pixels being chopped off, so your bike tyre isn't touching the bottom of the screen. I expect this might be related to Q-Lock handling this port, unlike the other Yakuza titles. The blur filter that sometimes appeared in Yakuza 0 is also gone, however the audio is slightly more quiet. Yakuza Like a Dragon has a cabinet in the larger Club Sega arcade again, but this time it's upstairs. This port is the same as the one in Yakuza 0, with a fraction of the top and bottom of the screen chopped off. At least it's pixel sharp. The audio is much louder than Yakuza 6 though. I'm not a fan of the fake plastic arcade screen surrounds though. In Lost Judgment, you'll find the game in the larger Club Sega arcade upstairs again, but on the other wall. Gameplay-wise, this is identical to the version in Yakuza 0 and Yakuza Like a Dragon, but it plays the audio slightly quieter. Now, one thing I came across when looking at these ports was a random sound bug in the second America stage. Going back to Yakuza 0, if you take this corner with turbo boost on, the background animates quickly and the music cuts out. I thought this might be an issue with the emulation in the Yakuza titles, but going back to the arcade original in MAME here, the same thing can actually happen. But which of these ports is best? It's hard to say as they all play fairly similarly. Yakuza 0 hides the fake plastic surround when running full screen, but it can be blurry. Yakuza 6 shows the full screen image, as per MAME, but there's a tiny bit of noticeable street noise in the background. I'd say overall the ports in Yakuza Like a Dragon and Lost Judgment are the best, with Like a Dragon just edging it due to being a bit louder. Now it's time to compare the ports at the pixel level. This one's actually quite interesting. Firstly, here's the Africa course in the arcade original at 4:3 aspect ratio. Wiping across to the DOS version, you can see it's not really that close to the arcade. Going back to the arcade at 10:7 aspect ratio, which was how the game output its signal, let's wipe across first to Yakuza 0. You'll notice all the sprites are offset, even the background layers, and the road itself isn't straight in front of you anymore. Wiping over to Yakuza Like a Dragon removes the blur filter, but adds the fake arcade surrounds. Lost Judgment is identical to the pixel. Going back to the arcade at 4:3 aspect ratio, let's now wipe across to Yakuza 6. Whilst the aspect ratio is spot on identical, once again the road is no longer straight ahead, and all the sprites are misplaced. As Yakuza 6 shows the same aspect ratio, let's compare the other courses to it. Here's the arcade Asia course. Wiping across to Yakuza 6, the same happens again with sprite offsets and incorrect road layer positioning. And here's the arcade America course versus Yakuza 6. Finally, here's the arcade European course, again versus Yakuza 6. If I switch between them instead of wiping, it's very clear how the road layer and sprites will shift quite a lot. So ultimately, none of the Super Hang-On conversions in Yakuza or Lost Judgment are actually arcade perfect. It's time to show all the versions head to head. I'll run through each course's first stage with a different music track playing for each location. The original arcade version, whether the upright, ride-on mini-unit or full limited edition, was a fast and challenging game and a worthy update to the original Hang-On. The DOS port is smooth but compromises on the key gameplay so much that it's hard to recommend, or indeed play. The lack of music is a big loss too. Yakuza 0, 6, Like a Dragon and Lost Judgment are all very close to the arcade, but not quite spot on. The offset road layer in particular is hard to ignore if you've been playing the arcade original. So there's actually no perfect way to play the arcade version at home without using the MAME arcade emulator. If you like this video, then throw it a like, or subscribe, ring the bell and overtake as many rivals as possible whilst hoping the road layer is accurate. And join me next time if you feel the need for speed. And I'm not talking about the Electronic Arts racing games.